Thank you for volunteering at the Burke Park Meredith Corporation and Rebuilding Together Workday. Burke Park is located at 601 East University Avenue, south of University, across from Iowa Lutheran, and next to the Carver Elementary School. If we look at this plat map, we can take a step back in time to the beginnings of Burke Park and how it came to be. John Burke was born in 1896 in Des Moines, Iowa, to Mr. and Mrs. P.F. Burke of 1108 East 8th Street. It has been written that John, also known as Jack, played in the neighborhood that became Burke Park. This picture is from a postcard I found dated October 29, 1907. It was titled Des Moines River, Boatman's Island, which was an island in the river just north of the park. This picture may have been taken from what became Burke Park years later, and would have been a similar view that young 11-year-old John Burke would have seen playing along the river in 1907. Note in the same year, the Capitol Park School District was merging with the other small districts and becoming the independent Community School District of Des Moines. Burke probably attended the old Longfellow School on East 7th. Capitol Park Schools had an outstanding football record, which may have influenced him as he grew up. Because as you see here, young John Burke became active in the new East High School where he played football. Along with some other big names in Des Moines history, he was the understudy to the Scarlet's first-string center, young George Whitmer, who years later became a Des Moines mayor and later served on the Gold Star Monument Association. Note, in later years, while remembering his friend, George Whitmer described him as a courageous young man. By 1915, the 18-year-old John Burke enlisted in the Iowa National Guard, 168th Infantry. He served 9 months on the Mexican border. In February 1916 or 1917, he and others that were serving on the border returned. In the East High student paper, The Quill, you see here, this cartoon depicts a letter from the border on the left that reads, "Dear Bunch, wish we were back in old Iowa playing football and studying Latin between halves," and is signed by former East High football players, now servicemen, including John Burke. We do know sometime during this time frame he worked as an inspector for Public Works. In 1917, John Burke was deployed overseas. January 1918, he was promoted to sergeant. But by October 1918, he was severely wounded by explosives and sent to a hospital where he was recovering until pneumonia set in with pleurisy, and he died November 9, 1918. Many others were killed in 1918, including names we still see today, including McHenry, McRae, and Fleur. The community was hit hard, and city council proceedings published on January 18, 1919, it was discussed holding a memorial for John Burke killed in France. They mourned the loss of the young men who gave their lives. The East High student paper, The Quill, notes that they are doing a living memorial to the young men who answered our country's call. More than 100 students gathered outside of the high school to show their appreciation, give dedication speeches, and plant 11 trees. Each tree representing a former East High student that died in the war. 11 stars decorate the 11 trees on the top of the newspaper. Some of these trees remain today, and as the students described, a reminder of the boys and their, quote, splendid service. Also in April 1919, we see the legal department uses park funds to secure by condemnation land east and west of East 6 and north of Fillmore. The records are incomplete, but the park may have been purchased over a 2-year period from 1919 to 1921. Eventually, there are 3 sections of Burke Park, one north of University, and the 2 other pieces south of University, one east of 6 and the other west of 6 down to the river. On January 9, 1920, we see these proceedings. It was discussed to name the public parks after soldiers who died in service. It was received and filed, quote, on the east end of the North Street Bridge to be named John Burke Park, end quote. In the article from the paper, we see that the resolution passed. Remembering those that gave their lives was still important to the community. There was an effort by the mothers and fathers to have Gold Star cemeteries nationwide and move the bodies of their loved ones home. Over the next few years, the movement continues and expands to wanting a more formal memorial site, and by 1923, Polk County proposes a war memorial at Woodland Cemetery. Soon, this will be linked to the newly forming Burke Park. February 27, 1924. Plans to beautify Burke Park, seen here in the paper, including a bandstand in the middle of the river and using the natural amphitheater formed by the riverbanks of Burke Park. Quote, East Des Moines residents are enthusiastic over the possibilities. View is magnificent, and one can see a mile either up or down the river, end quote. Also in 1924, the Polk County Gold Star Memorial is to begin, yet it doesn't. The article above states it is to be in the Gold Star plot in Woodland Cemetery, again as a lasting reminder of their sacrifice in the World War. Cemetery historian Gerald LeBlanc tells us there's a gap where the memorial was to go, originally at Woodland Cemetery, but the Association of Mothers and Fathers raised so much money that they ended up needing a larger location for the bigger memorial. The Tribune shows that there was a selection process, and Burke Park beat out Drake Park, Glendale Cemetery, and several other locations, and was selected in 1925. On June 28, 1925, 90 years ago, Assistant Superintendent Harry Staves told the paper that after being purchased several years earlier and sitting undeveloped, that in 2 weeks Burke Park will be open for recreational purposes. Playground equipment, including slides, teeter-totter, swings, and giant strides, were ordered. Grading was completed and a playground, ball diamond, and 2 tennis courts were to be established. Around the same time and across the street, work is beginning. This February 1926 paper from the Des Moines Tribune says it is almost complete. By September 1926, hundreds of Guard veterans gather to dedicate the new memorial. April 24, 1929, work is finally to begin in Burke Park, a $1,000 improvement program. Superintendent of Public Parks Frank Mathis announces it will be graded and shrubbery and trees planted. In 1929, there are 6,992 attendees. But by 1930, the work was complete and the attendance had increased to 9,796 attendees. July 1933, the Des Moines Tribune reports the Des Moines Playground and Recreation Association is beginning work on the wading pool and shelter house. Cost is $2,900. The stone for the shelter is from Stone City, Iowa, and is 18 feet wide and 43 feet long. The wading pool is going to be circular and 50 feet in diameter, made from concrete. Original plan as seen in this photo was to locate it in the northwest corner, but it was believed that baseballs batted from the diamond at the southwest corner might hit the waders or land in the pool. So the building is relocated to be built in the northeast corner and facing west. Ms. Catherine Creek, Superintendent of Recreation, says it will be ready by August 5th. Also of note, it shows in the drawing below the photo a tennis court, but we still don't know if it was constructed. It was also mentioned in the 1920s. Here's a map from 1939 outlining different parks. The planning during this time period is not just for the parks, but looking at children as a whole. Their schools, their parks, their playscapes, very integrated. It's truly amazing the forethought our ancestors gave to setting aside great places for us today. By now, the park board was created and had a beneficial effect upon park development. As a result of this, permanent buildings, according to the 1939 Schools and Parks Report, were well designed and well located, including at Burke Park. 10 years after the initial 1929 site improvements, Burke Park was fenced. In documents, it is mentioned to keep the children safe from the street. Popular activities in the 1930s included baseball, wading, hopscotch tournaments, mostly for girls, marble tournaments, mostly for boys, soap sculpture, and even the soapbox derby, which ran down the new University Avenue Bridge in the early years. In 1937, Burke Park was one of 33 playgrounds open throughout the summer, and during this era, playgrounds were supervised. On Monday evenings, starting at 8 p.m., they had, quote, community night programs, which were scheduled and consisted of, quote, stunts, community singing, and movies. In the 1940s, community sings continued, and over the years, activities changed. The documentation between the 1930s and 1970s is spotty on park activities, but what we do know is marbles was a favorite activity from the 30s through the 70s. Were any of you around during the 50s? Now the year is 1950. It's spring. Marble shooters celebrated as a new cork surface portable ring replaced the traditional smooth dirt ring for the spring's 15th annual City Marble Tournament. Burke Park was one of many parks where marbles were played and the city tournament was held. In this June 1955 planning document, we see 3 sections: north of University with the Gold Star Memorial and walks, south of University west of 6 north of Fillmore and open space, and south of University east of 6. There was a shelter, wading pool, sandbox, swings, teeter-totter, volleyball, basketball area, tennis courts, and the backstop. This is a photo in 1954 from the merry-go-round with the wading pool and sandbox in the background. And still in the 1950s, on the other side of Burke Park, the community is gathering to remember those that passed in the war. Of interest during this time, around 1956, Iowa Lutheran Hospital sends a letter to ask the city if they can purchase part of the park for a parking area for the hospital. It was moved. The board denied the request for the reason that this area is part of the memorial and is desirable for park purposes. It was seconded and carried. The land did eventually go to Iowa Lutheran around 1977, from what we can tell. I don't know if this played a role in the sale, but it is noted by the 1970s the Gold Star Memorial was in a state of disrepair. By 1978, former Mayor George Whitmer and friend of the late John Burke is part of the team to call for additional improvements to Burke Park, which is now only the portion south of the street, and the memorial, which remains on the north, is restored by monies from the Gold Star Monument Committee. In May 1979, the trees are planted behind the memorial as seen in the photo. By 1996, in this park planning drawing we see, the school has changed. The tennis courts actually installed further west, 2 sand volleyball courts, and a couple of playgrounds. Of note were more trees along the edge of the park compared to the drawing around 40 years earlier. Note the memorial is no longer shown on the drawings for the park, neither is the western portion of the park going down to the river. Today our citizens can use technology to find Burke Park online. It still sits on the University Corridor, which has much more traffic than the historic Burke Park. The playground from the early 1990s remains, but soon will be replaced by a great group of volunteers. There are 2 sand volleyball courts. The sand volleyball court edges will be improved and a bench installed. The tennis court has been updated and has a new accessible walkway. But the same wading pool and the same shelter from the 1930s remain too, whether it was then or now, similar to when John Burke played in the space as a child in the early 1900s, or the many children in between sculpting soap, playing ball, or shooting marbles. For decades they have used this park, and the children in our community continue to enjoy the space today. Today, as you volunteer, you hold in your hands the future of Burke Park. Take with you the history of this park, built on the memories of those that served. Remember John Burke and all those that have gone before us and how they helped shape our community, our nation, and our local parks. Enjoy your day volunteering, and thank you again for your service. Special thanks to volunteer historian Steve, who helped me over the past year digging for these Burke Park treasures, and a special dedication as well to neighborhood leader Lorraine, whose strong, vibrant spirit helped in this neighborhood for years. She will be deeply missed.